Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you this morning. Excuse me. If you will, have a seat. It's time to begin this morning for our Bible study. We're going to be continuing in the book of John. This morning we're going to be in John chapter 10. John chapter 10. And as we get started this morning, if you will, please join with me in a word of prayer. Our Lord, our Father, we are grateful to you for the many blessings of the day, and we thank you, Father, for your Son. And as we study this morning and better understand him as our good shepherd, Father, help us to be good disciples and good followers as well, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so this is another section of the I ams, that is the statements of Jesus, where he is sort of doing two things. He's asserting his deity. Remember, we looked here in the book of John, and he, when he says I am, in reference to his life and in reference to his existing prior to Abraham even, and they understood this, and so these I am statements become very important about who Jesus is from a deity standpoint, but then also they help us to understand what he was doing in regards to his mission, in regards to his work. If I could have a volunteer read verses chapter 10, verses 1 through 6.
Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that endureth or entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not the things for which he spake unto them.
All right. Thank you. So we have here, by the way, a couple of different statements by Jesus. He begins with this parable of the door and the sheep. Now, Jesus is going to explain this, but before we get there, it says here that they struggled with this parable. They struggled with this teaching. What is Jesus trying to say?
I am the way.
Okay, he's saying, I am the way. But the parable itself, what's he describing? Remember, parables literally mean to be thrown along. So he's trying to use a physical representation to teach a spiritual truth. What's the physical truth?
People are going to be following him.
Okay, of this parable, what's he describing? Sheep, okay, but what specifically? What's going on?
They're coming in the wrong way.
Who is?
The sheep are not. The shepherd is at the door, and they enter the sheepfold by the door, but they're coming in another way.
Who is?
The sheep.
Not the sheep.
You have other people that are saying things similar to what Jesus says, and you've got to sort out which one is which.
Okay. All right. So here we go. This is good. All right, when we're talking about parables, okay? Parables are a physical teaching that represents a spiritual one. Okay? So the first thing we've got to do with the parable is understand the physical teaching. Jesus is saying that there are people that are going to try to jump the fences. How many of you, when you go into your own backyard, jump over your fence? Okay, but I mean, right? Or how many of you, when you try to, when you go home this afternoon to go have dinner or go have lunch, How many of you are going to bust out a window to get into your house? What are you going to use? The door. Why? Because you have the what? The key. If you belong there, you have access, right? Jesus is saying other people are trying to access something that where they don't belong. Okay, he's using that physical representation, but he says, but the shepherd, the person who belongs, they go in and everyone involved, the sheep, everybody knows, the porter, the doorkeeper, everybody knows, right? That they belong there. Anybody ever walked into the wrong house or gotten into the wrong car? I have. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would pick me up from school every day. And apparently, without my knowledge, somebody else had a minivan that looked exactly like my mom's, or at least it did to a 10-year-old in a hurry trying to leave school. Right? So I hopped in, and then there was this split second of, not my mom. And then you jump out. But if I tried to sit there, pretty sure that lady that was not my mom at some point is going to go, what are you doing? Right? Same thing with the doorkeeper. Somebody who doesn't belong, right? If somebody walks into my house and Linda's there, if it's not me, she's not going to just go, oh, hey, honey, welcome home. Right? My dogs, the kids, they're not just going to be like, oh, I guess this is our new dad. Right? And that's what that's the physical representation Jesus is trying to do, is that people who don't belong aren't going to come in the right way, and they're not going to fit. They're not going to belong. Okay, so then the spiritual teaching that he's trying to drive at, and this is what we have to remember about parables also, is parables teach one truth. They are very simple. They're intended to be simple because they are the teaching of the masses. Parables teach one truth. And the one truth that Jesus is trying to get through here is that he's the one that belongs. He's the master. And he's going to explain that in verses 7 through 10. But he's the master. He's the one that opens the door. He's the one that's going to lead out to life. Robbers, if they get in, are they going to lead those sheep out to prosperity? No. See, that's the difference, right? Jesus is the one. He's the master. He's the one that belongs. The sheep should be able to see that for themselves, right? That's what he's saying. He's the master. That's the teaching here. And even as he says, a stranger they will not follow because they don't know him. Have you ever tried to walk someone else's dog when they're around? It doesn't work very well. Especially if that dog is used to being with their master. We run into this. Linda and I have 2 dogs. And try as we might to be equal, they are not. One is mine, one is hers. And if we go on walks together, we have to walk our dog or it does not work. Because the dog wants to be with their human. And they're going to constantly be pulling the lead, trying to cross over each other, doing all kinds of craziness because, no, this isn't how it works. I am with this person. A stranger they will not follow. This is the teaching that Jesus is trying to get across. He's the master. He belongs. And we need to, if we are truly the sheep, then we should also recognize this. All right, so Jesus is going to explain a little bit. Let's read verses 7 through 10 if somebody can read that for us.
And Jesus said to them again, most assuredly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it most abundantly.
All right, thank you. Okay, so just again, this is a separate teaching, verses 7 through 10, but it's going to further explain what Jesus is driving home at. Okay, so you have the parable in verses 1 through 6. Here we have a separate parable in verses 7 through 10. Now it's on the same subject, and so it's easy for us to get confused, but in the first parable, what is Jesus driving home at? Who is he in the first parable? The master, the shepherd. What is he in this parable? The door. Okay? You can't be the same, you can't be two different things in the same parable. That's confusing, right? It wouldn't make sense for someone to be the prodigal and the older brother, right? So verses 7 through 10, separate parable, but it's on the same thought process. In fact, he even is going to talk about this stranger and the thief and the killing and the stealing. He's trying to drive home similar points, but he's using a different teaching here. So the first one, he's the master, he's the shepherd. Now here, he's the door, he is the way in. So before it's about him being the master of the fold, this one is about how do I gain access to the fold.
Jared, is he saying this to the Pharisees, or who's he saying this to?
Probably just the masses at the temple. He's just teaching. Okay, so we see this shepherd, and we see this shepherd is taking really good care of his sheep. Now, sheep aren't this sentient, right? But, hey, that shepherd's taking really good care, you know. They don't have to worry. They're always got food. They always got water. I want to be part of that herd. And Jesus is explaining how we do that. How do we become part of his fold? How does he become our master and us recognize him? How do we get where Jesus knows my name and calls me, and I lovingly follow him? Well, we come in through the door. He is the one that is protecting in a different way, right? The shepherd protects the sheep, but this is protecting entrance. This is protecting the blessings of God. He says, others have come. There have been other false doors. There have been other people who have made it seem like they're the way in. They are not. And he says that they tried to call the sheep, and his true sheep didn't hear them. Because they knew that that wasn't the right way. So he's saying here that us as the followers, us as the sheep, we have a responsibility to know what we're looking for. Right? Because in the first parable, the sheep hear their master and they follow. Here he's saying there were false ways, there were false doors, but my sheep didn't hear that. My sheep knew what the truth was, and they found me. And when we enter in through Jesus, we find pasture. And I love verse 10. One of my favorite statements from Jesus. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. He contrasts that against the thief who only comes to destroy and to kill. What life is Jesus talking about in verse 10? Okay. Life eternal? That's part of it. Is it exclusively it, though? Spiritual life? He's talking about life, just life in general. He says they have life and they have an abundant life. Jesus is saying that when you come through him, and I want us to be aware of this, life with Jesus is not just some like far off, oh, my only hope is heaven someday. That is our hope. But would life with Jesus really be that great if the only thing that we had to look forward to is dying? Just think about that. Because if Jesus is speaking exclusively about the afterlife and life eternal, the only hope we have as Christians then is death? But Jesus is saying, no, I came that they can have life and they can have an abundant life. It's not a life of torture and destruction and eventual death. It is a life of abundance, peace and joy that leads to more life. And we need to recognize that. We need to see that Jesus offers the best life in every way, shape, and form. He offers the best life now and the best life for eternity. And that's part of our job as Christians, is to demonstrate that to people. Now, when we say abundant life, don't take that to mean that everybody that becomes a Christian is going to somehow be financially well off or independently wealthy or something of that nature. That's not the abundance he's talking about. He's talking about the abundance of God, of all the spiritual blessings and of a life well lived. And at the same time, we do understand there are financial blessings, right? We're promised that he provides the seed for the sower, right? We're promised that he's going to, as we give, bless us in return, right? He's going to make sure we have what we need.
You can be provided in lots of ways besides just money or something.
Oh, absolutely. Now, when we say this, though, we need to understand that Jesus might provide beans and rice. Not filet mignon. But did he provide? Okay? Again, perspective. Right? All of these people who that are always talking about how God has promised this wealth and everything. If you have food in your pantry at all, if you have more money in your pocket than you need for today, you are wealthier than most of the world. Done. We got to remember, when Jesus says this about an abundant life, we talk today about people living paycheck to paycheck. These people live day to day. You got paid daily. You bought your food daily. And people all over the world still live that way. And so the fact that we have beans and rice ready for tomorrow, we're in good shape. Don't complain about your leftovers. But see, God has promised an abundant life. He has promised a life where we will have more than enough. We might have to adjust our definition of enough. Nowhere in the gospel do I see that the blessings of God include a new iPhone every year, or a new car every 3. No. But we'll have enough. And in abundance. We'll have an abundant life because it'll be a life, again, well lived. It'll be a life full of spiritual blessings and surrounded by people that are doing the same things. And this is why Jesus says about people who might have to make difficult decisions, that they may have to leave father, mother, brother, sister, but they gain those things 100-fold. Some of you are blessed to have generations of your families be members of the church. Other people aren't. A lot of people are maybe the first generation, maybe the second generation, and the church is a haven for them. But that's an abundance, right? Because even though they had to maybe leave behind their physical families, right? At one point, Jesus had to leave his physical family behind. But he had 12 brothers. More even than the physical brothers he left behind. And he had all of those sisters. Women who washed his feet and took care of them, invited them into their homes, provided financially even for Jesus and his apostles. That's the abundant life. And we have that as Christians. And I know it's real popular right now, especially on the TV with all of these, health and wealth teachers and preachers, but this is a better approach to the gospel. Well, number one, it's actually biblical. But number two, life's more than money, right? All right. Now we get into another parable, and there is a possibility, by the way, here is, and I think it's worth noting, that John may not be recording all of these in real time. That is, Jesus may not have spoken all three of these parables one right after the other, but it's very possible that John is collecting them. Okay, Jesus told a bunch of parables about being a shepherd. Let's put those together, and that's this section of my gospel account. It also could be that Jesus did say all of these back to back to back. We don't really have any way of knowing that, but we do need to understand that, again, now as we get to verse 11, he's now moving on to another different teaching. If I could have a volunteer read verses 11 through 18.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters them. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep inn. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice. There shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father.
Thank you. All right, so now we have the parable of the Good Shepherd. What's our contrast here in this parable?
The shepherd versus a hired hand.
The shepherd versus a hired hand. Why is the shepherd more invested? He owns the sheep, right? They're his. right? Why did David kill a lion and a bear as a young man before he went to Goliath? Protect the sheep, because they were his, right? Now they were his father's, but they're his, right? We do crazy things for things that are ours, don't we? Right? Amazing things sometimes. When my kids were younger, I have nephews and everything, and I love my nephews. I love all little kids, and I've done things to help protect them. But then you hear these stories about 100-pound soccer moms lifting cars off of their children, right? When we take ownership of them, we fight for them, right? I don't like to see anybody get abused, but somebody abuses my kids, well, now they're in for it, right?
It's not just your kids, it's your whole family.
Well, yeah. Hmm?
You don't want anyone to be abused.
No. But it's different, right? When it's mine, we've left our kids in the hands of babysitters over the years, but I expected the babysitters to take care of my kids, but I never expected the babysitters to take care of them like me, right? Because not their kids. Not in the same way, right? Many of you have been teachers, been in those situations, and you lovingly refer to them as your kids, right? But it's not the same as your kids, right? And that's how it is, and that's what he's driving at, is that thief, that liar, that murderer, he doesn't care. Right? That hired hand, he's just there. Oh, well. Not mine.
Do you think the Jews had any idea at all what he was talking about in verse 16?
Possibly. There's verses 19 through 21 tell us that there was a lot of disagreement about everything that Jesus has to say here. I think those that were really willing to hear Jesus did understand, because they understood who he was, and they understood all of those prophecies, even those that we've been looking at in Isaiah and other places about the inclusion of the Gentiles, and it wouldn't be, I guess, disturbing to them. At the same time, we see Peter, a man who was called by God to bring the Gentiles into the church, right? He was called by God personally to bring Cornelius in, and it's not until almost the very end of his conversation with Cornelius that even Peter goes, I see what God's doing here. Right? Remember, Peter didn't want to go. Peter wanted nothing to do with this Roman Gentile, and especially not having food with this man. And then he sees all of these things, and then Peter goes, oh, I see what God said. I get it now. So, it's hard to say, 2,000 years removed, how many of them really got it, but I think they got it. I think the ones that I think the ones that understood who Jesus really was understood what he was trying to say. But as they say, hindsight's 20/20, and I can only look at this knowing what he means in verse 16. So whether in the moment anybody got it, I don't know. At the same time, we do see men like Saul, later called Paul, who almost immediately after his conversion is accepting of the Gentiles. So, hard to say. Now, Jesus uses this teaching of the good shepherd versus the hired hand, and he's going to teach us another truth, not just about bringing other sheep in and making the flock even bigger, but as verse 15 says, he's laying down his life for the sheep. Now, verse 16 is important, don't get me wrong. He's talking about bringing in the Gentiles. He's talking about bringing in people from other nations into the flock, but the real focus of this parable, the real focus Jesus wants us to get at is the laying down of his life. And Jesus even talks about this with Pilate, right? Because Pilate's questioning Jesus and he says, don't you realize that I have the power to put you to death? Anybody remember what Jesus says? You would have no power if it wasn't given to you. Did Pilate really have authority over Jesus? No. We sing a song, 10,000 angels, right? 10,000 is a nice number. It was actually way more than that. Jesus says it was 12 legions of angels. Did Jesus have the ability to call those angels? Did Jesus have the ability to scourge the earth and just end everything right there? Yeah. So did Jesus go to the cross because, well, the Roman army is the Roman army and, man, he didn't stand a chance? No. It's almost as though Jesus is kind of preparing them for maybe some claims that might come after his death. See, he was just a man. He couldn't even stand up to Pilate. He's no king. But Jesus is trying to help us to understand, help the apostles, help everyone else that's gathered there to understand that the most kingly thing he's going to do is to lay down his life. He says in verse 18, nobody's taking it from me. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. So why did Jesus go to the cross? Our salvation, but physically, why were the Romans able to nail Jesus to the cross? Because he willingly went. Why did Jesus walk out of that tomb? Because he could. That's the point. When Jesus says to the apostles after the resurrection, I have all authority, he's wanting them to think about this. I have all authority, right? If I choose to allow my physical body to be beaten, abused, and destroyed, I can then take that same physical body and stand up 3 days later and walk out.
What is prayer? It's marvelous that he cared that much for me, right?
Absolutely. It's the beauty of the gospel that he was willing to do that, right? And that's the point he's driving home here. Remember, this is, in the book of John, we're already drawing to a close here as far as Jesus's ministry and life. He's at the end already. Because in chapter 13, is the Lord's Supper, and then chapters 14 through 18 are all the night of the betrayal. John spends more time in that one evening, but what that means is that the first 12 chapters of John are super condensed. He puts all 3 years of Jesus' life into not even quite 2/3. And so this is part of Jesus preparing the apostles, right? Preparing the people. And even today, there are sadly some that would say that Jesus failed, and that's why he went to the cross. There are those that would claim that the Jewish rejection was more than God really planned for, and so he instead instituted the church in order to then later come back and establish a physical kingdom, and that's just silly. Does God fail? No. So if we believe that Jesus is God, if we believe he is the Son of God sent to this earth, is the crucifixion a failure?
That's what he was saying.
That's the point. And that's why he closes verse 18 with that statement, "This is the commandment I received from my Father." He's letting them know, this is why I came. Yes, he came to teach, and he came to show us a better way, and he came to be an example. But ultimately, his crowning glory and the victory that he wins, and the victory that he wins not only for himself, but for all of us, took place on that cross, right? If Jesus had done no other miracles, that would be enough, right?
Jesus came to fulfill the scriptures and prophecy.
Absolutely. Mhm. But this is the command. This is Jesus saying this is part of the mission. Now, personally, I would absolutely have loved if Jesus had gotten some more time on the earth, right? Some more time to teach, some more time to affect hearts and minds. And at the same time, I'm not surprised, right? A message as radical as Jesus is. There's also a part of me that goes, I'm surprised that the revolt didn't happen sooner, right? But he's trying to help the apostles and the other disciples and us now, 2,000 years later, understand that this was all part of it. It wasn't plan B. It wasn't I guess we'll have to figure out what to do now. That's why Paul in the book of Ephesians chapter 1 says that before the foundations of the earth, they had this plan. Not after Adam and Eve ate of the fruit. Before he said, let there be light. God had this plan. And so then we have this division, verses 19 and through 21. A division occurred again among the Jews because of these words. Many of them were saying, he is a demon and he is insane. Why do you listen to him? Others are saying, these are not the sayings of one demon-possessed. A demon cannot open the eyes of the blind, can he? So we see this is all now getting tied back to the miracle about the blind man. Then we have a time marker in verse 22. So this doesn't take place necessarily in the last week, but this is definitely towards the end of Jesus' ministry. Verse 22 says, at the time of the Feast of Dedication. Anybody know what that means? Verse 22. I heard it.
My little note said this is Hanukkah.
It is Hanukkah. The Feast of Dedication is Hanukkah. It is the celebration of the rededication of the temple after Antiochus Epiphanes despoiled the temple and even went so far as to offer pigs on the altar of God. The abomination of desolation, as Daniel put it. And the Feast of Dedication celebrated the Jewish revolt that led to the reestablishment of temple services and the rededication of the temple, the cleansing and the recommencement of sacrifices. Because remember, when Moses had commissioned the tabernacle to be built, all of those things were just built. It wasn't until it was all put together and then it was dedicated that it became holy. Because a bunch of non-holy people touched it, right? When it came to the building of the temple, even foreigners were used in the actual construction process. So it wasn't holy until it was dedicated. And so when it was defiled by Antiochus, it had to be cleansed, it had to be purified, and then it had to be rededicated. And then once that was done, then it's holy again. And that's what Hanukkah is really about, is about that rededication, that cleansing of the temple. And so that takes place in the winter, right? So this is probably the winter leading to the spring. But this gives us a time frame, right? Very much towards the end of Jesus' ministry, but we're not like triumphal entry yet. Okay? And Jesus is going to continue to talk about sheep. But he's in here he is in the temple. Now, we do need to understand that Hanukkah was not part of the law, or the Feast of Dedication as it's called here. It was not part of the law. It was much, much later, right? Because Moses established or delivered the law from Mount Sinai roughly 1,450 years prior to this point in time. And so the Feast of Dedication was a memorial feast, but it wasn't necessarily one established originally by God. And yet we see that there are other examples of the same thing happening. In the book of Esther, for example, a new feast was added to the Jewish calendar. Anybody remember the name? Starts with a P. Purim. Right? A new feast celebrating the Jewish deliverance from their enemies. Now, what's important for us to understand about this then is that this was not necessarily one of the official Jewish feasts, and yet it was obviously very common for there to be a pilgrimage. And this is where Judaism and Christianity are very, very different. Okay? Judaism required these pilgrimages multiple times a year. That is, Judaism required travel to a specific place for worship. Specifically, it required travel to Jerusalem and to the temple. And we see that Jesus is there. It's winter, and Jesus is walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So he's there preaching and teaching in the temple because it was a time of pilgrimage. It was a time when, maybe not by commandment of God, but by standardized practice and acceptance, large numbers of people were there. Okay? And so he's taking advantage of this, and he's preaching and he's teaching in the temple. And we're out of time. So we will stop there, and Lord willing, we'll pick up in verse 24, Lord willing, next week.